I'm Nima Rajan. Torrential rain from a slow-moving storm has washed out roads and flooded basements in western Cape Breton and southwestern Newfoundland. A state of emergency is in effect for Cape Breton's Victoria County. Schools were closed today, and residents are being warned to stay off the roads because many have been badly damaged by flooding. Pounding rains have overwhelmed the sewer system and flooded main roads in Port aux Basques, Newfoundland, including the Trans-Canada Highway. The Liberals have the backing of the NDP in their push to return to a hybrid format in the House of Commons. But the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois are against the proposal. The Tories argue the move has nothing to do with pandemic restrictions. Deputy Leader Candice Bergen says the hybrid format would let ministers sit in their offices and evade questions in Parliament. The Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada says the number of highly indebted households appears to be rising as government pandemic aid programs wind down. Paul Beaudry says calculations indicate the share of highly indebted households is about to surpass the pre-pandemic peak recorded in 2019. He says a long period of historically low interest rates is one reason a quarter of households took on more debt. And he warns the economy is likely sensitive to any increase in borrowing costs. Black Friday is already just about 2 days away, but sales have been running for several weeks. Deloitte Canada's 2021 Holiday Retail Outlook claims Canadians will spend on average $1,841 on the holidays. This is up 31% from last year and up 8% from pre-pandemic levels. Rising concerns over supply chain issues and potential shortages have prompted many Canadians to start shopping early. The next storm taking aim at southern BC isn't expected to be as bad as the last one. The previous storm triggered landslides and floods that killed 5 people and forced thousands from their homes. Much of BC's inner south coast is expected to get hit with up to 80 millimeters of rain starting tonight and continuing into Friday. Abbotsford Mayor Henry Braun is hoping repairs to a dike system will put the town in the best position to manage the coming rain. At least 8 environmental groups are threatening to sue Alberta Premier Jason Kenney for defamation by the end of next week. The coalition wants Mr. Kenney to apologize and retract his statement. He said that a public inquiry found the groups spread misinformation about Alberta's oil and gas industry. Mr. Kenney's spokesman says the Premier isn't surprised by the action and will vigorously respond in court if and when necessary. Manitoba's new Premier, Heather Stephenson, is promising more help to people hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic and to improve the province's healthcare system. The Progressive Conservative government's speech from the throne also pledged 400 new nurse training positions with a practical nursing program for up to 20 students in the north. The throne speech was delivered the same day the PC party filed court documents that were in defense of the leadership race that saw Ms. Stephenson win and become Premier. Shelley Glover, who fell short with 49% of the vote, is asking a judge to order a new vote, alleging irregularities. 9 provinces and territories have already signed deals with Ottawa on the $30 billion 5-year childcare plan to cut fees to an average of $10 per day. And today, Ontario officials were set to meet with the federal government to try and hammer out a deal. Education Minister Stephen Lecce says the money the federal government was offering would not reduce fees to $10 a day. Quebec Premier François Legault is defending his government's response in the early days of the pandemic. This comes after a report from the province's ombudswoman found long-term care homes were almost entirely forgotten in the province's pandemic planning. The ombudswoman found Quebec neglected the danger of COVID-19 to long-term care residents. However, Mr. Legault says his government did the best it could with the information it had. Almost 4,000 long-term care residents died in Quebec during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Starting tonight, players in the Maritime Junior Hockey League will be donning specially designed jerseys to celebrate Indigenous groups in the country. This as part of the organization's Week of Reconciliation. The league's 12 teams will take turns sporting jerseys that feature an image of a child outside a residential school and the phrase, "Every child matters." After the special reconciliation schedule, teams will auction off the jerseys and proceeds will be given to local Indigenous communities. All right, we'll be back after the break with a look at child poverty in Canada. A group called Campaign 2000, which is a coalition of groups working to end poverty in Canada, says at the current rate, it could take up to 54 years to end child poverty. We'll have an interview with the national director for Campaign 2000 up next, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. "32 years ago, following the signing of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, Canada made a promise to eradicate child poverty by the year 2000. This is a promise that has yet to be fulfilled. A new report released today by the group Campaign 2000 says at the current rate, it would take 54 years for Canada to end child poverty. The National Coalition of 120 Advocates for Children and Families finds over 1.3 million Canadian children, or 17.7%, are living under the poverty line. Well, joining us now to provide us with a better understanding of child poverty in Canada and what needs to be done is Ms. Leila Sarangi, National Director of Campaign 2000. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me today.
So let's start with a brief overview of this report, how it was put together, and the main takeaways.
Yeah, so this is actually an annual reporting that we do. We've been, it's our 30th report card. We've been doing this since 1991 because after that promise was made, the rates of child poverty kept going up. We weren't seeing any difference in communities. And so we got together as a coalition and have been tracking that progress or lack of progress of the federal government in achieving the goal to end child poverty. So what we found this year, we were looking at the latest tax filer data that was available. So we're looking at 2019 numbers, setting up pre-pandemic context. And what we found was that, 1,313,000 children, that's 17.7% of all children in Canada are living in poverty. The gap between the rich and poor is widening, and families who are living in poverty are living in deeper poverty. That means they are further away from that poverty line than they have been since 2012.
Now, I'm sure when a lot of Canadians think about poverty, it's hard for them to picture a child going through it. So what does child poverty look like in Canada, and how is it measured?
So child poverty in Canada is pretty dire. So when we talk about that rate of 17.7%, it does hide a little bit who is living in poverty. So we know that if we look at the disaggregated data, for example, Status First Nations children living on reserve have a poverty rate of 53%. So that's more than 1 in 2 kids living on First Nations reserve live in poverty. And that looks like hunger, overcrowded housing, lack of access to services and medication. There's also very high rates of poverty above that national average for lone mother-led families, children with disabilities, racialized families, newcomer immigrant families. They all have higher rates of poverty, but the manifestations are the same. In the day-to-day, it's about not having enough to meet the basic needs. It's about parents who are working minimum wage jobs, often multiple minimum wage jobs, trying to, put things together, meet their daily needs, working long hours. Kids are hungry, and there's a lot of stigma still associated with that. So there's the mental health piece as well as the physical. There's the stress that's associated with it. There's the shame and the stigma that is also associated with it.
Now, you're mentioning certain demographics are being impacted. So what would you say are the root causes behind this societal inequality?
Yeah, so the report card looked at the systems in place. So there are a lot of barriers for these families to accessing certain programs. And I'll use the Canada Child Benefit as one example because we talk about that a lot in our report. The Canada Child Benefit in its current form, it has the potential to go a long way towards eradicating child poverty. But the challenge is that, one, there's not enough of it to go around, so that those families who are in deep poverty are not getting enough of that benefit to lift them up to the low income measure. But there's also eligibility criteria that is arbitrary and denies certain families eligibility. So for example, families who have precarious immigration status. Their children may be born here, they may be citizens of Canada, but if the parents applying have precarious immigration status, they're here, they're working, they're paying into the income tax system, they're denied access to that federal benefit because the federal benefit is arbitrarily tied to their immigration status of the parents. And so that's like one example of the kinds of systemic barriers that are, throughout all kinds of systems, from healthcare to housing to accessing childcare and income supports.
All right, ma'am, just about 10 seconds left here, but if our viewers would like to have more information on this, where can they visit your website?
Please visit our website. It's www.campaign2000.ca, and there's the national report card and our provincial and territorial report cards there as well.
All right, ma'am, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with our Forum Daily weekly market update with Catherine Murray. And of course, more news from around the world after that. Welcome back. Up next, we have Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here. All yours, Catherine.
Thank you, Nima. Hello and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing markets continue to grind higher despite the headwind of a rate backup, which is the big headwind for expensive tech stocks. We are seeing that U.S. 10-year yield at 1.68%. It's actually leading some analysts to say that we could see a 20% downward pressure in some of those tech value, high valuation companies. So do be mindful of that. When we think about rates and why they're rising, it's because we're seeing inflation pick up. There's absolutely no denying that that is occurring. It's actually leading some economists to believe that the U.S. Federal Reserve might have to quicken their bond tapering program. Interestingly, today we will get the minutes from the latest Fed meeting, and it will give us a bit of a read in terms of what the U.S. Fed presidents are thinking and whether or not we'll have to see rate increases sooner than expected and also quicker bond tapering program. So that's important to watch as well. Big news this week, speaking of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Fed Chair Jerome Powell was renominated in his role. That gave the market a bit of a sigh of relief. You actually saw the market pick up on that news, even though it was largely expected. The reason why this is so important is because I think the street consensus is that he has been very adept at being able to communicate with the street about inflation being transitory, that the U.S. Federal Reserve will not raise rates too fast, too soon, and stave off the economic recovery. So again, a bit of a sigh of relief. It was a very important note this week for sure, in part because his ability to communicate helps stabilize the market, stabilize stocks. So that's the takeaway there. The other big news this week, of course, was interesting news out of the Biden administration. So the U.S., UK, Korea, Japan, and India, just to name a few or all of them, that they are going to release oil reserves. But what's interesting about this, and this, of course, is in order to combat the rising WTI prices, the market basically shrugged this off. And in fact, you saw a rally in the price of crude oil up by over 2%, basically because the reserves are not nearly big enough to combat the supply shortage. And also was probably largely expected. In fact, one interesting note I saw, a research note on Wall Street, said that the SPR, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserves, really, the release of that only equates to 2 days of oil supply. So on the back of that, we are seeing energy continue to rally and really lead these markets higher. It is a holiday shortened week with the U.S. Thanksgiving Day holiday tomorrow. So, and then also, of course, a shortened trading session on Friday. So a slew of economic data was reported today. It was pulled forward. Pretty much everything was in line, but the one item you'll need to know is that the initial jobless claims hit a 50-year low. So very positive on the U.S. job front, and that's probably what's going to be in the headlines tomorrow. Away from that, U.S. retail earnings are front and center with some big misses, specifically the Gap as well as Nordstrom's. Those stocks were down by about 16 and 20% respectively. Interestingly, the Gap blaming inventory delays for lost sales and also increased costs. The bulk of recent earnings, though, however, have seen some nice upside surprises, but you are seeing a little bit of sell on the news. Interestingly, on that point, Zoom, for one, saw a 35% year-over-year growth and is on track for 50% revenue growth this year, yet the stock traded lower on their news. TSX has certainly seen energy stocks continue to lead the market higher. Real estate as well as industrials also seeing some upward momentum. Meanwhile, analysts over at Scotia as well as TD have some positive bank earning previews. So that's actually seen or helped perhaps some of the stocks move a little bit higher. But also, of course, banks in Canada as well as the United States tend to perform better as you see the interest rates rise. You know, a little bit more money. They get a bit of a better spread. Of earnings note as well, in Canada, ATD, Alimentation Couche-Tard, reported a slight earnings miss with revenue ahead of expectations, though. $14 billion they earned for the quarter. Just think about that number, the size of that number. They also increased their dividend by 25.7%. The throne speech had no surprises, wide on range, short on details. The Conservatives, though, was opposing it, and also noting that the speech contained nothing in it to address inflation, which I think we are all certainly seeing and feeling with respect to the price of meat and dairy increasing quite dramatically. Well, Nima, that does it for me. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Lots to keep in mind. For more analysis and news on the financial markets, be sure to tune in to The Buck Stops Here with Catherine Murray. All right, well, meanwhile, Apple is suing Israel's NSO Group, which is a so-called hacker-for-hire company. In its complaint filed in California, Apple says NSO's spyware, called Pegasus, has been used to attack a small number of Apple customers. NSO Group has broadly denied wrongdoing and says its products have been used by governments to save lives. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Ethiopia's government says Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has gone to the battlefront to take charge in a year-long war. He has left the daily work of running the country to his deputy. This comes as rival fighters from the northern Tigray region approach the capital of Addis Ababa. The war in Africa's second most populous nation has killed an estimated of tens of thousands of people. The leaders of Japan and Vietnam have expressed serious concern about any unilateral actions aimed at altering the status quo in the South China Sea. They have agreed to work together to sustain free and open sea lanes as tensions escalate in the region amid China's rise. Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh is the first foreign leader to visit Japan for talks with new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who took office in October. Their comments come amid China's increasingly assertive territorial claims in the disputed region. The World Health Organization reports COVID-19 cases jumped 11% in Europe in the last week. And the WHO's European director is warning that without urgent measures taken soon, the continent could see another 700,000 deaths by the spring. Globally, cases and deaths have risen by about 6%, and about 3.6 million new infections and 51,000 new deaths reported in the past week. Sweden's parliament has approved Magdalena Andersson as the country's first female prime minister on Wednesday. However, she resigned as Sweden's prime minister hours after being appointed. She did so after suffering a budget defeat in parliament, and her coalition partner, the Greens, left the two-party minority government. Three parties announced an agreement to form a coalition government in Germany. The center-left Social Democrats have been negotiating with the Green Party and the pro-business Free Democrats since narrowly winning a national election in September. The three-way alliance would replace the current Grand Coalition of Social Democrats and outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats. South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, has lost control of the city councils of Johannesburg and other major cities following recent local government elections. The ANC won less than 50% of the votes in the municipal elections earlier this month. The party has ruled the country since the fall of apartheid in 1994. However, it has seen its support wane in successive elections. The ANC compounded its problems by failing to form coalitions with smaller opposition parties. Two journalists from Norwegian state television were arrested and held for over 30 hours by security forces in Qatar without explanation. The arrest of the journalists from NRK came while they reported on the upcoming FIFA World Cup. They were allowed to return to Norway on Wednesday. The two were reportedly detained after reporting on the condition of migrant laborers during a live report. The journalists told NRK that they were not allowed to leave with their equipment. Qatar accused them of trespassing and filming without a permit. Belarus's oldest newspaper has been banned. This on the 115th anniversary of its founding. The ban comes amid a crackdown on independent media. The Nasha Niva newspaper was outlawed as extremist on Tuesday by the Central District Court in Minsk. Under the ruling, anyone who publishes or reposts Nasha Niva materials may face prison terms of up to 7 years. Nasha Niva extensively covered massive anti-government protests that erupted last year after disputed elections, which saw President Alexander Lukashenko gain a 6th term. A thick cloud of smog has enveloped Pakistan's cultural capital, earning it the title of the world's most polluted city. A Swiss air quality monitoring company says Lahore now stands at the top of its polluted cities ranking. Its air quality index on Wednesday morning measured 203 on the U.S. AQI scale versus runner-up Delhi, India, with 183. Australia's Great Barrier Reef is spawning in an explosion of color as the World Heritage-listed natural wonder recovers from life-threatening coral bleaching episodes. Scientists recorded the corals fertilizing billions of offspring on Tuesday. The spawning event lasts for 2 or 3 days. The network of 2,500 reefs suffered significantly from coral bleaching caused by unusually warm ocean temperatures in 2016, 2017, and last year. All right, that will do it for your look at national and international news for today. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.